Okay, you guys can turn in your PowerPoint to, it should be on page, actually you guys have different pages because I forgot I printed this out only on 6 per page. Anyway, smell and taste. Let's go over this really quickly. It's kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about. Olfactory sense. Okay, olfactory region. I'm going to flip on over to this next slide, and then you guys can kind of follow along in the notes part. Okay, so the olfactory region, it's in this area right here. This is, anytime you hear that word olfactory, think smell. So the olfactory region of the cortex is the area where we interpret smell. Okay, so that's just an idea of what to know. Okay, the olfactory region is on the top of the top side in your nasal cavity. It's about the size of a stamp, actually. If you want to think of it that way, kind of up in this area, at the top part of your nasal cavity. It's about the size of a dime, like I said, size of a stamp, and that is where we have what's called chemoreceptors. Our olfactory receptor cells are called chemoreceptors. Chemo is in chemical. Anyway, so that's the olfactory region. So olfactory receptor cells, again, chemoreceptors, they're sensory cells. They pick up, they sense, odor particles, odor molecules in the air. Olfactory hairs are actually on these neurons, so you can see them in this picture. These neurons kind of end in these olfactory hairs. They're kind of like their dendrites, I guess, if you will. So that is, those are the hairs, and then it's actually covered in this mucus layer, kind of like makes a little layer over the edge of those cells. Olfactory filaments actually are just like these. Once it leaves this, it goes up to olfactory filaments, which moves into the olfactory nerve, which then goes to the olfactory bulb, which then goes on to the brain. So that's kind of the path that smell takes, if you will. Olfactory receptors are very sensitive, very, very sensitive. It only takes a few odor molecules of this inhaled odor to actually stimulate these hairs on these chemoreceptors. But the other thing to know is that it also adapts so that once, that smell has been going on for a little while, then you don't actually smell it anymore. That's why, if you walk into a room and there's a certain odor, after a minute or so, you don't really notice the odor anymore. It's because they get fatigued. So, they kind of like adapt to that smell. Okay, so kind of the order in which all of this takes place. So odor molecules, we breathe those in through our nose. They enter our nostrils. Okay, then these odor molecules actually dissolve into this mucus layer right here. And when they do that, then these hairs, get those odor molecules hit those hairs, and then these cells are stimulated, and then they send a message all the way back up to the brain. Goes through the filaments nerve, through the bulb, up to the brain. So that's how that works. Make sure I didn't miss something. One thing to know too, and this is really cool, but the olfactory pathway to the brain, so the way that these, the messages, this kind of chemical message, is carried back to the brain, this whole pathway heads through the limbic system, which is in your brain, but the limbic system is actually responsible for your emotions. So that's why they say that sometimes smells, kind of trigger emotions. Like, I still remember, I can still remember what, I don't know, like you remember smells, for a long time. Like sometimes if I get a hint of, like I get a certain smell, it makes me think of a certain person, or makes me think about a certain memory. Like when I smell cloves, I think about this one time when I got really sick on some soup that just, it had a lot of cloves in it. And that's what I remember puking up for so long. So when I get that scent, I'm like, oh my gosh, that smells horrible. Like I can't stand it. So that's one example. Another example is, sometimes I'll get, oh no, you just get whiffs of something that kind of bring you back to a moment and you think about it. So it's kind of interesting. It makes you realize too, a lot of commercials you see on TV, some of those perfume commercials are very like, borderline inappropriate even, or not even borderline. Some of them just are inappropriate. And you think about it, they kind of mess with your emotions, maybe in those commercials. Like they're kind of like geared towards that. And that has to do with smell. Like smell actually can stir emotions in us. So it's kind of crazy. Okay, anyways, pretty cool. So that's that. Injuries and disorders of the nose, rhinitis. Rhino is the root word for nose. Itis is inflammation. So that's all rhinitis is. Sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, you have allergic rhinitis. That just means you've got allergies and your nose is running, basically. So it's just the inflammation of the mucous membrane that lines the nasal passages. So colds, upper respiratory infections, drugs can cause rhinitis, those kind of things. And then septum problems. So what it has listed here is a deviated septum, which is basically where your septum is like that central part right between your nostrils, the center of your nose, that's your septum. And it deviated means that it's gone to like one side or the other. So sometimes the people have broken their nose, or sometimes they have to deviate your septum on purpose. Like, for example, when my dad got his, several years ago, he had a pituitary tumor removed, and they had to go through his nose, and that was one of the things they had to do was deviate his septum so that they could get everything, get to where they needed to get to. The other thing that's not listed on here but is a perforated septum. Perforated just means it has a hole in it. So perforated septum a lot of times can be caused by drug use, and like inhaled drug use. Okay, gustatory. Gustatory, whenever you hear that word, think taste. Okay, gustatory is taste. Olfactory is nose. One thing to know in this area is that your sense of taste really is very much influenced by smell. Okay, a lot of times if you can't smell, you can't taste. So those two things kind of go together to tell your brain what's going on. The book said that your mouth has approximately 10,000 receptors, or gustatory cells, that receive taste. Excuse me. Okay, taste buds. We've all heard the word taste buds before, and this picture is a picture of a taste bud. But we have taste buds on our lips, actually on our lips, like the inside of our lips, tongue, which we know we have more on tongue, but we also have it in the sides and the top and the back of our mouth too. But most of them, of course, are on the tongue. Each taste bud can contain 50 to 100 gustatory cells. So this picture only shows like 9 cells, okay, but it can hold 50 to 100. And one taste bud can actually have all 5 sensations even, all 5 different cells that pick up different tastes. So the way that this works is the first, let's go back through here. So gustatory cells, papillae is where we see the taste buds. That's kind of like when you look at your tongue, papillae are kind of the bumps that you actually see. And then the taste buds then are located inside of that. Excuse me. Gustatory hairs, kind of like the olfactory hairs, are attached to these neurons up here that kind of pick up everything. Taste port, of course, is just going to be like a gap or a hole. Tastants. What's my spot here? Tastants. Taste tense. I'm sorry. I keep saying that wrong. It sounds weird when I say it. So anyway, so the order in which this goes, okay, food is mixed with saliva, which you guys know what that is, and then it's produced taste tints. Okay, taste tints then stimulate gustatory hairs to send nerve impulses to the brain. So taste tints are food mixed with saliva, and are the hairs on these gustatory cells, okay, respond to that. It stimulates these cells, and then these cells send that impulse, okay, back to the brain. Okay, they say that our cells have 5 basic tastes, okay, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and the 5th one is called umami, which I know sounds crazy, but the book said that this is like beef and then processed foods. Like we have our own taste buds for processed taste. But it's really interesting to me that maybe why it's so, sometimes processed food can be kind of addicting. So anyways, don't know. Another thing, I guess that's it as far as this picture goes. Disorders of the tongue, infection, of course, you can get an infection, tongue piercing, or it's been severely bitten for whatever reason, traumatic accident or something else. But one thing about the tongue that's really awesome is that it can heal more quickly than pretty much any other part of the body. So it really repairs itself really quickly. Of course, injury is a possibility, and then abnormal growth. So first thing that says abnormal growth is hairy tongue, and this is actually a growth of gustatory hairs, but usually it's caused by someone not taking care of themselves, not brushing their tongue whenever they brush their teeth. So everybody make sure you brush your tongue when you brush your teeth, okay? Otherwise you can get hairy tongue, which is kind of gross to think about. But it can also be caused by meds. It can be caused by drinking a lot of coffee. It can be caused by tobacco. It can be caused by radiation. So make sure you guys are brushing your tongue. Okay, whenever you brush your teeth, brush your tongue. And then the last one here is burning mouth syndrome, which is kind of a chronic disorder that this burning, like that burning of the mouth, can actually continue for like months or years. So it happens for a long, long time. Okay, I think that's it. Hopefully you guys know these. Gustatory is sense of taste, inflammation of the nasal membrane, rhinitis. Part of the taste bud would be the gustatory hairs, part of the sense of smell, olfactory hairs. So anyways, but that's it as far as this chapter goes. Pretty short, pretty straightforward. If you guys have any questions, let me know.